Hi, I'm Becky Meagher, and welcome. Welcome to Transitions, Mind, Body, Spirit. Transitions. We have so many different transitions in our life, and I like to use the metaphor of triathlon, something that I did 3 sprints this summer. In a triathlon, the first thing you do is you swim, and then you go into transition area again and you change totally and you get on your bicycle. And then you get in a transition area and then you run. And so that's a good metaphor for what happens in our life. We may start out in one area. We may be thinking about, oh, I'm going to grow up and be a fireman or whatever. And then life changes and everything, my heavens, it's a very different trajectory. So today we're going to do 2 shows on this gentleman because he has such a fascinating story. And the unique thing is that, so many things. I can say cowboy, musician, entrepreneur, starting wellness centers in different parts of the country, author, documentary person. I mean, it goes on and on. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Lee McCormick.
Hi, Becky.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're here. It took over a year to get you here because you're such a busy man.
Well, yeah, and we had a little sidetrack over that year,
Yes,
too,
you had a sidetrack with, can we use the word, cancer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. And you're pulling out of that, and we'll get to that too.
Yeah.
But glad you're here.
Yeah,
and
I
on
am
the
too.
Upward healing trajectory too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's that has been a whole journey in itself.
Yes,
Yeah.
My heavens, that's a whole show in itself. But let's begin with your fascinating story on where you were born, and there was a mixture of cattle and Wyoming, and then beaches in Jacksonville. So tell me about that.
Well, it was a long, long time ago.
Yes.
I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, and I grew up at the beach. My family had been in Jacksonville since the 1860s.
Wow.
Well, Jacksonville wasn't even Jacksonville at that time. So I grew up at the beach. You know, I still surf. I've always loved the ocean. I've always had an ongoing deep relationship with the ocean and the water. But my family had homesteaded a farm, a cattle ranch, right after the Civil War. And I grew up between that farm and our house at the beach. So I was around the livestock and out in the woods all the time.
And was that farm in Wyoming?
No, that was in Florida.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in Florida. My dad bought a ranch in Wyoming when I guess I was 4 or 5. I don't remember exactly. Mm-hmm. And after he bought that ranch, I ended up spending my summers on the ranch in Wyoming. But we would leave the day after school got out, drive across country to Wyoming.
Wow.
And this is in the 60s. And then about 10 days before school started again, we would load back up and drive back to Florida.
Wow.
Yeah, so I did a lot of road trips, and I've never stopped. I've been on the road ever since.
You grew up with it.
Yeah, I did. I grew up traveling.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then when you were a kid out in Wyoming, you were out there just being a kid, and were you riding horses or?
Yeah, it was a good sized ranch, and the North Platte River ran through that place. It was about 60,000 acres.
That's a big.
And it was heaven to be a kid there. You know, I had my horse and I fished all the time, and it was just great. Like, wow. I've never gotten it out of my blood.
Wow, that was, wonderful. And then, so you had changes when I believe you were 12 and your parents got divorced.
That's right. Well, they got divorced when I was 12. You know, that always as a kid, it always turns your world upside down.
Right.
And I come from a big, pretty complicated old Southern family. They were in the construction business, which started in, early 1900s, like 1910, 1915, 20. And it to me, it was normal. But, you know, in hindsight, after all the things I've learned, it was complicated, but I don't know how it couldn't have not been complicated, honestly, because they were so involved in so many things. And my dad, who was born in 1907, had grown up in Florida before it was the Florida we know. There was no air conditioning.
Wow.
Most of the roads were dirt. They was dirt roads. They rode mules. They didn't have cars.
Whoa. He was a pioneer.
Yeah, they really were pioneers. And they had that pioneer mindset. You know, they were tough like that.
Yeah.
But when my folks got divorced, I ended up going with my mom and had to leave the beach. So that was as your, I guess if you look at the arc of your life, that was the first time that I ever really had a heartbreak. Because I love the beach, and you know, your family, your parents, I was real close with them. So that was tough and interesting. And then I had a brother and sister my brother was 15 years older than me, and my sister was 17 years older.
That's another generation, practically.
Yeah, I was a surprise, as my mom used to say.
Yeah.
But you know what's something interesting is my dad was 50 when I was born, and I had a daughter when I was 50.
I'll be darned. Well,
so history repeated itself.
Yes, and
it's
who knew that would happen? Yes. Yeah. Wow. So there you are in Jacksonville, still, right? But with your mom, because your dad you're not living with your dad.
He was still living at the beach. Yeah. Okay. My dad lived at the beach, and my mom and I moved into Jacksonville.
Oh, okay.
So I went back and forth.
Okay.
But I lived primarily with my mom.
And then you thought you'd go to college, right? But I think when you were 13, you picked up a guitar.
My mom bought me a guitar, and I took lessons for, I don't know, a few months, just learned some basics, and then I just played on my own. And when I went to college in '74, I got a gig. I got my first gig playing at a Shakey's Pizza in Durango, Colorado.
Whoa, Colorado's so cool.
And that was the start of a whole other trajectory.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, Colorado in the '70s, especially Durango, was still really, it's still a small town, but it was really small and really local. There were still mountain hippies. Telluride was totally undiscovered at that time. And all the little ski towns had really very cool, unique, independently owned restaurants and little bars in them. So I ended up booking gigs all over the southern part of the Rockies. I went to school for 2 semesters. Third semester, I never showed up for class because I had too much going on.
The music was calling you.
Yeah, it
was.
It was.
Yes. So how did you get from Colorado then playing music to Nashville?
Well, I spent 3 years in Colorado, and then I moved back to Jacksonville. I went back home to the beach. All through my life, there's these big circles where I would leave the beach, but I would ultimately end up back there again a few years later. Or I would be at the beach and I'd end up back in the Rockies again.
Okay.
So I moved back to Jacksonville Beach, and I put a band together, and a guy was in a club we were playing one night that lived here, that used to work
in Nashville.
Yeah, lived here in Nashville, that worked for MCA. This was like 79, 78, well, 78, I guess. And he lived here, and he said, "Man, you guys are really good, and you're really good. You ought to come to Nashville." So a few months later, we did. We just packed up and moved up here.
Wow.
Me and the band.
And then you ended up going to college at Belmont, right?
I did. I was on the road for a couple of years, opening shows for people.
Wow.
Out of here. And I got tired of being on the road. They were wild times.
Yes.
And so I went back to school at Belmont. I was still playing some, but I went back to school at Belmont. And I ended up graduating from Belmont.
And do you think being on the road at that time, that's when cocaine came in your life?
You know, it was the 70s, and living in Florida in the 70s, it was kind of like those movies like Blow and all these other old movies about the scene back then. It was kind of, at least in the world that I circulated in, the clubs and the bars and the beach scene, it was pretty much everywhere.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I mean, that's back in the days when the Coast Guard would get after a shrimp boat that had a load of bales of pot on it from Colombia, and they'd throw all the bales overboard, and we'd be out surfing, and bales floated up. That happened probably a half a dozen times.
Wow, wow.
You know,
Free marijuana right here.
It was fun times.
Yes.
Before everything got so sophisticated and weird.
Wow. So I found it fascinating that when you got your degree was in finance?
Yeah, I ended up majoring in finance, but I had minors in theater, music, and agriculture.
Wow.
Because I'd gone to school at Fort Lewis in Durango, and I was an ag major.
Okay.
And then when I returned to Jacksonville for a while, I'd gone to Jacksonville University, and I was friends with the head of the theater department. And I got involved in a play there, and then I just stuck around and went to school for a couple semesters and did a couple shows. And
Wow.
yeah, so, you know, pretty much whatever has really interested me or hooked me, I'd pursue it.
Just do it.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And so at Belmont College, well, now it's university, you was to become your wife.
I did, my first wife.
Okay, your first
Yeah.
wife. And somehow or other, you transitioned to having a cattle farm in Florida?
Well, what happened was I met, her name was Elaine. I met her at Belmont. We got married. And after we got married, we moved to my stepdad's big ranch in northern Colorado.
Oh.
So he had a 120,000 acre ranch.
Wow.
It's an incredible place.
Because your mom had remarried.
Yeah, my mom had remarried and
Okay.
was married to, his name was A.D. Davis. And so I went out there to go to work for him on that ranch, which was like living on a movie set. It was like Yellowstone. It was not quite as graphic as Yellowstone, but it wasn't that different either. Yeah, and I was just in love with it. I loved that way of life. We lived in a little town called Cowdrey. There were maybe 300 people in Cowdrey.
Whoa, but not much social life for your wife.
No, she got over it. And
Yeah.
I couldn't blame her. I wasn't happy about it, but I couldn't blame her. And she wanted to come back here. So ultimately we ended up moving back here.
Okay.
And we had our first daughter
Okay.
after we moved back.
So you had your daughter, and then you moved back to the Nashville area, and then somehow or other Nunnally got in, and cattle came in your life again?
Well, after having worked for AD, he came to me and said, listen, if you'll find a ranch big enough to run 300 cows, which is like an economic unit used to be, if you ran at least 300 cows, you could make a living back in the old days. And so he said, if you'll find a place, I'll buy it and you can run it and we'll start an operation there.
Okay.
So that's what I did. That was one of those offers you couldn't refuse.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So that was okay, but somehow or other your marriage fell apart, and there was still, because we're coming into, cocaine was in your life, and down the road it kind of overtook you. As
Well,
I
all the
understand.
partying and from the years on the road and all that stuff. I wasn't on the road. I was still playing. I've always played music, but I wasn't out actively playing very much. But the behaviors didn't change. So that's the thing about developing a dependency on a pattern of behavior or a drug or food or sex or any of these things that we now call addictions. They just take different forms, but they all serve the same purposes. So it becomes your coping mechanism. And that didn't stop. And I was not a good guy to be married to at that time.
Yeah.
So we ended up getting divorced.
Okay.
And after we got divorced, I really went off the rails. And then in '97, I checked myself into a treatment center in Arizona.
In Sierra Tucson.
Yeah, Sierra Tucson, the old Sierra Tucson.
Okay. That's a pretty famous Sierra Tucson. That was the place.
It was
at
the
time.
place. Yeah.
And how long were you there?
I was there for about 6 weeks.
Okay. You lived there, therapy.
Yeah, it's 7 day a week, you know, really deeply immersed in all those processes. It was, that experience changed my life, but it changed my life, I think, more being in groups and hearing other people's stories and what they had grown up or lived with, the experiences that they had had in the world was so compelling to me that it really made sense, because I didn't realize it at the time, but I never really bought the official story of, you know, you're born and you grow up and you go to church and you get a good job and you go to college, then you get a good job and you get married and you have children, and all these things lead to happiness. Right?
Okay.
And something always felt off to me in that storyline. Well, the part that was off was the whole backstory of all the issues and the trauma and the stuff that comes up in a treatment center. So you're hearing the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say it.
Right.
You know, and when you plug the rest of the story in, it makes sense. It made sense to me why I could never really drink the Kool-Aid of this path to life is going to lead you to happiness.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yes. So because you went to Sierra Tucson, it changed your life. Somehow or other, the land that your stepdad had bought that you were developing for a cattle ranch, you had the idea to start the ranch, which was a treatment facility.
It's still operating, the ranch.
It's still operating.
It's very different than when I owned it, but it's still operating.
The fact that it is so different because you incorporated, as you explained to me, Native American things in there. Ceremonies, and it was different than where the Sierra. It was a different. You created a different model.
You know, that's what I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time. What I've always done in that work, because, you know, it led me to, I've got 25, 26, 7 years now of working in the mental health treatment realm.
Mental health treatment.
And creating programs. Anything that I saw turn the lights on with people, like when you have a group of people and they're involved in a group or a process or doing something, anything that you could really see a spark come alive in them, and they would step into it, to me was a good thing. You know, because the journey of recovering ourselves, that's what we're recovering, is our relationship with ourselves. Anything that inspires us is medicine. And I've always looked at it as there's such an opportunity to create opportunities of inspiration for people in treatment. If you're not careful, it becomes this big, heavy, you know, 28-day unraveling all your stuff, and every day you're focused on your past and your trauma and your story and your behaviors and all the wreckage of your life. Well, if you keep, it's important to go there. It's important to step into that stuff. But if you don't bring a balance to it, then people get trapped in this big loop. Back in the day when I did this and I did that kind of thing. And so what you ended up, you were very successful with the ranch. You kind of put your own stamp, and I believe you had some other people that assisted you, kind of partners and stuff. But at a certain point, you decided to sell it. Yeah, I did in 2010.
And also, you also wondered, well, these people that go to the ranch, where do they go after they're out of the ranch? And you started another place, Integrative
Life Center.
Integrative Life Center.
It's on 16th Avenue, which it was. I also one of my incarnations here. I was in the graphic design business.
I didn't know about that one.
Actually, I backed a woman that I had been dating that was incredibly talented. I partnered with her and backed her and started a design firm and small ad firm, but all we did was music industry stuff.
Oh, wow.
And so the design company was 2 doors down from where the Integrative Life office was on 16th Avenue. So I had these, I had my music world life on 16th, and I had the design world life on 16th, and then the recovery world life on 16th.
Yes.
So me and 16th Avenue had a long run together.
Yes, but then also you were in California, and you started a center, co-started a center in California also, right?
I did. Well, the California part came about. I'd been divorced for, I guess, 6, 7 years, 8 years. I'm not big on time frames. It just, life is always moving forward for me. But I've been divorced for several years, and through some mutual friends, I had read the book, The 4 Agreements.
The 4 Agreements.
Miguel Ruiz's book. And that book just, it was so powerful to me. It was like Miguel was talking to me, which is really the way it's written. Miguel doesn't write. He would teach, and they would record his teachings and then transcribe the teachings.
Right.
So it literally was that book is a dialogue. And it affected me like that, and it felt so correct, his point of view and the way he explained life and relationships.
And California.
That I ended up meeting the woman that's now my wife, and God, we've been married for 22 years. I ended up meeting her through my relationship with Miguel and the group of teachers that he had trained that I'd gotten involved with.
Okay, so there was the California component.
And she lived in LA.
And she lived there, so you're visiting her, and the 4 Agreement guy is in and around there.
Yeah.
And so that's enriching your life in addition to what's happening in the Nashville area. And then you ended up taking this woman as your wife and have 2 children.
We have 2 daughters.
Yes.
Yeah, I had 2 daughters with my first wife and 2 daughters with Mimi. Her name is McCormick. So we're Lee and me, which a lot of people think that's amusing.
Yes, and I want to do a show on her. She's fascinating in itself, a chef. And you also opened up a restaurant out in Nunnally.
We did. Yeah, we had a restaurant, the Pinewood Kitchen.
Yes.
That was, it was across the street from the farm. And so I had a 10-acre biodynamic garden.
Wow.
We had bees, we had mushroom logs, we grew all kinds of produce, but it was all biodynamic. I got to be good friends with Jeff Poppin, the barefoot gardener.
Yes.
Yeah, and so Jeff helped set all that up. And then I started grass finishing cattle, and I was raising hogs in the woods. So all the meat products and all the produce was super clean.
Wow.
And that all went into well, not all the beef and pork went into the restaurant, but a lot of it did.
And that restaurant unfortunately closed. I never got a chance to go to it. It was on my list. But then, and we only have a couple more minutes, somehow or other you, with the 4 Agreements, you started doing seminars about that, going to Mexico
We're
and
leading
Peru.
journeys. I lead journeys to Teotihuacan, where the Pyramid of the Sun and the Moon are, outside of Mexico City.
Right, which I was in this spring, actually.
Yeah.
I was there with Ginny Gentry.
Oh, okay.
And Andrew Critchels, who says hello, by the way.
Yeah, Jenny and I taught together. We worked together for probably 10 years.
Right, and Andrew being a dancer, he said that you invited him to the ranch to help movement, to help people with addictions.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is very different also.
It is.
Yes.
It is. Well, as human beings, we're really amazing creatures. We're amazing beings. And we're so multifaceted. And yet we tend to kind of dumb ourselves down into these silos. And then we live within the silos of our roles and our the identity that we've developed of ourselves, and the stories that we tell of ourselves. And we get so attached to that stuff that the really amazing, broad, multifaceted nature of us as human beings ends up getting left out of the mix.
Yes.
And so in the recovery process, to move more energy, anything, as I said a moment ago, anything that inspires people, that gets them to stretch and move outside the bounds of those silos that they've been living in is really beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to be skiing next month in Vail for 2 days because I haven't done it in so long. And that's a stretch. It's been a number of years since I've done that. But it's the idea of stretching, doing things that you may be a little uncomfortable, but do it anyway. You know?
Yeah, if it's a little bit uncomfortable, it's a good sign. I mean,
Right.
yeah, it means you don't know.
Right.
You're not telling yourself, oh, I know about this.
Yes.
Right.
So we only have a little time left, and we're going to, on the second show, we're going to go even deeper on this. But right now, you sold those businesses, other than you still are with spiritrecovery.com. You're still leading people in Peru and in Mexico. And then you are on the healing side of cancer that was involving your liver.
Yeah, I had a tumor on my liver, and I had a second tumor in what they call the mesentery, which is just your abdomen area. It was two different cancers. The one in my abdomen, they treated, and it's been in complete remission for 8 months now.
Yay.
So that was easy to treat. The liver is tricky. But it's 90-something% dead, the tumor is.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a miracle. That's great.
Yeah. So I've done really well, and it's, you know, when you get cancer, you really meet your relationship with life for real in a way that you don't. I met my life in a way that I had never met my life before.
You're right.
Everything gets real.
Everything gets, I'm sure, like as real as it's going to be. You're facing death.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we say in Mexico, the angel of death comes to sit on your lap, you know, and have a conversation with you.
Wow. Yeah. And a ritual that I did when I was in Mexico, there were two people as the angel of death, and you know, you had to say, "Are you ready?" Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a whole conversation in itself.
That
because
is. So what we're going to do is, Lee, thank you very much for this episode. There is so much more, and I really want everybody to see the next show that we're going to have on Lee McCormick, Stage 2. And thank you, Transitions, Body, Mind, Spirit.
Thank you.
All right. That's the first show.
Okay.
And he does a few things in there. And then